Hello, 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 my friends. My name is Evelyn Joy, and welcome back to my channel. It is Sunday morning. My family's actually going to church this morning. It's going to be our first time going to Sunday school since maybe 5 months ago. Our church is finally doing Sunday school again, so we will see what that's like. It's going to be awesome. So I'm excited about that. But California's been on my mind a lot. There are different pastors involved in lawsuits in California because California has said that churches can't sing and that, singing passes coronavirus and that, churches are seeing a double standard because they're allowed to serve food to the homeless, but they're not allowed to sing. They're allowed to, serve the community and help people, but they can't teach the word of God or have services or sing. And so they're seeing a double standard. So people are allowed to go to the beach, but they're not allowed to sing at church. So churches have been going to the beach to sing. I even saw a church in California that sang at Walmart because you're allowed to go to Walmart, and we're living in a time I never thought that would happen, that, a lot of people think separation of church and state is so that the church does not control the government, but really separation of church and state is referring to the state not controlling the church. And that's exactly what's happening in California right now. Agree with me or not, it's kind of a fact. But the question is, what do we do when the government says you can't do this, you can't do that, as far as your Christian faith goes? And my family, we've been obeying the government. We've been staying home and doing Zoom Sunday school and stuff like that. But in Daniel's time, that's why I felt drawn to the book of Daniel, thinking of the people in California, right? In Daniel's time, Daniel was a favorite of the king, and there were some men who were jealous of him, and so they went to the king. They said, how can we trap Daniel? He never breaks the law. He never does anything wrong. How can we trap him? And we want him gone. We want him dead. We want him out of here. What can we do? What kind of legal trap can we get him in so that he can have to be killed, right? So they said, oh, king, live forever. They went to the king, buttering him up and saying, there are people in your kingdom that they want to destroy your kingdom. They want to worship other gods. And I think we should pass a law that people can only pray to you and worship you. Because you see, Daniel, he followed the law, but he was also faithful in prayer. Every day he opened his window and he prayed to the Lord. So they said, this is how we can trap him. So when they made the law that you can't pray to any other god, Daniel continued to pray to God. And so he got thrown into the lion's den. And if you know anything about Daniel in the lion's den, God shut the mouths of the lions, and Daniel's life was spared. And then the king decreed that all the land would know about this God of Daniel, right? Then at the same time, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were three young men like Daniel. They knew Daniel, and they were in captivity, and they were in this special group of men that were to be, part of the cool crowd with the king, right? But they had to follow a special diet, but it went against the diet that God had given to the Israelites at the time. They weren't supposed to eat pork. They weren't supposed to eat fatty meats and stuff. So they said, this goes against our God. We need to eat just like fruits and vegetables. We can't have pork and all these fatty meats and stuff. And they said, you're going to look sickly and I'm going to get in trouble. So they said, trust us. Our God's not going to make us look sickly. He's going to make us look great. So after a week of trial, they looked healthier than all the other guys. So then again, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they came along this whole situation where everyone was forced to bow down to this idol, but God said not to bow down to any idols. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when all the trumpets played and everyone bowed down, they were the three that were left standing. So the king, he gave them a second chance and a third chance. He said, no, you need to bow down. And they didn't. And they said, our king, our God is powerful to save us, because he said, I'll throw you to the fiery furnace if you don't bow down to this statue. And he said, you can do with us what you want. Our God is mighty to save. He can save us if he wants to. And even if he doesn't, we're not going to disobey our God. We're not going to bow down and worship this statue that you've made, because it goes against what we believe. And God, the furnace was so hot that the people that threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace, the people that threw them in, they died. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were inside, they did not die. They were just walking around inside like, well, this is interesting. But when the king looked inside, he saw 4 people. And one of them was glowing, and it said that that was Jesus, that was God in human form, and angelic type form, glowing, And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came back out of the furnace untouched, unbruised. They didn't have a scratch on them. They didn't have a burn on them. And we saw the hand of God in a miracle, So the point of these is, even if, Jesus says to, pay your taxes and pray for your leaders and stuff. So not to outright purposefully go against the government and, don't be rebellious. But if it comes down to your government asking you to do something that's against your beliefs, God's on your side. So that's why the separation of church and state was created, because the people that immigrated originally, the pilgrims that came to America, they were escaping the Church of England. That was, in England, they were saying, if you want to go to church, you're going to our church, and this is the only church. And the pilgrims, they wanted to worship God in their own way. And so they traveled, they risked their lives, a lot of them died and stuff, to come to America. So that's why they set up separation of church and state, so that the state wouldn't say, this is our church that you have to go to, like some countries do. I won't name names, but there are countries that do that. But yeah, so I've been thinking about Daniel this morning, so I thought before I wake my kids up and get them ready for church, I'm going to read what Elizabeth George in my study Bible, what she had to say about Daniel. So at the beginning of the book of Daniel, she wrote this: the sovereignty of God, date written 530 BC, so approximately 530 years before the time of Christ. Author, Daniel. Setting, Babylon. That's the country. The book of Daniel encourages the exiled Jews by revealing God's sovereign program for Israel during and after the period of Gentile domination. The times of the Gentiles, Luke 21:24, began with the Babylonian captivity, and the Jews suffer under Gentile powers for a long time afterwards. But this period is not permanent, and a time is coming when God will establish the Messianic kingdom, which will last forever. Daniel repeatedly emphasizes the sovereignty and power of God over human affairs. Because Daniel is of such stellar character, God gives him a view of the future, rivaled only by the Apostle John's visions in the book of Revelation. This is why many scholars call the book of Daniel the apocalypse of the Old Testament. That's true. So Daniel, he also has some dreams that are described, and there are dreams that are predicting the future of what will happen when Jesus returns, right? So where to find it? The fiery furnace is in Daniel 3, 8 through 30. The writing on the wall is Daniel 5. Daniel in the lion's den is Daniel 6. Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts is Daniel 7. Daniel's prophecy for 70 weeks is Daniel 9, 20 through 27. Make sure your Christian distinctives don't get blurred through compromise with the world around you. I think that's a main theme for today, so let me read it again so you can soak it in. Make sure your Christian distinctives don't get blurred through compromise with the world around you. Finding God's heart. During his many years as a captive, Daniel could have despaired. He could have thought God had abandoned him. He could have cried, "Where is God?" Instead of giving in or giving up, the courageous man held fast to his faith in God. Daniel understood that despite his circumstances, God is sovereign, and he was working out his plans for the nations, kings, and individuals. Daniel is an inspiring example of how to live a godly life in less than ideal circumstances and in an ungodly world. Be faithful in your study of God's word, sustain your prayer life, and maintain your integrity. Then, like Daniel, you will have a marked influence on those around you. Godly behavior, Daniel 1, 8 through 9. Others may consider words such as consecrated, holy, and sacred to be old-fashioned, but God doesn't. They speak loudly of a heart and mind set on worshiping Him. This was the mindset of Daniel and his friends while they were in captivity, and it earned them the respect of the king and his subjects. Determined to be determined to be a countercultural woman, to be dedicated to Jesus no matter what others may think. This is how you are to live your life as a woman with a high calling to be consecrated, godly, with a high calling to consecrated, godly, holy behavior. Yes, your life is fast-paced and busy as you serve the Lord and take care of your responsibilities. Sometimes it's difficult to even think of having time to reflect on His holiness. Psalm 27:4 has timely advice. One thing I have desired of the Lord, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Keep your focus on the Lord. And it has a prayer. Lord, I don't think of myself as a holy person, and holiness seems unattainable. Help me to see myself the way you see me, and to be part and to do my part to behave in a godly manner, to cooperate with you as you transform me into a godly woman. Amen. Read the Bible in a year, Daniel 1 through 2. So I'm going to read Daniel 1, the first chapter. Okay? This is before Daniel in the lion's den and before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go into the fiery furnace. This is, it says, the title of this chapter says, Daniel and his friends obey. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and brought the articles into the treasure of the house of God, of the house of his God, lowercase g. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in which there was no blemish, by but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now, from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They changed their names. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave new names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and Hananiah Shadrach, and Mishael Meshach, and Azariah Abednego. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank, before he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies as you see fit. So deal with your servants. So he consented and with them in this matter, and tested them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all the literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the chief interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So now I'm going to read about Daniel in the lion's den, which is Daniel 6. So I was reading Daniel 1, and now I'm going to read Daniel 6. The plot against Daniel 6. It pleased Darius, so now it's a different king, King Darius. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one of the 3, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then This Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So they found a loophole to trick him, to catch him. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom and the administrators and satraps, the counselors and the advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statement and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter." Therefore, King Darius signed the decree. Kind of like when your kids bring you a permission slip home from school and you just sign it without thinking. He kind of did that. He was like, "Oh, all of the counselors and all of the satraps and all of the people say this is a good idea and it's to exalt me and they can't pray to anybody else. Sounds good." Didn't really think about it, did he? Daniel in the lion's den. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before God, and they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god?" Sorry, I lost my spot. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "This thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, who does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you signed, but does his petition 3 times a day." So Daniel's over there praying like you said not to. Right? Sorry. And the king, when he heard these words, and was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and the Persians, and there is no decree or statute which the king establishes that may be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of the lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continuously, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, and the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Daniel saved from the lions. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting with no musicians. No musicians were brought before him. Also, his sleep went from him. So he didn't sleep that night. He was so disturbed. He didn't eat. He didn't listen to music. He was so worried about Daniel, right? Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continuously, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent an angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den with no injury whatsoever found on him, because he believed in his God. Darius honors God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of the lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then you can see how hungry the lions were. They were ravenous. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who have delivered Daniel from the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay, so then it goes on to tell visions that Daniel had. Daniel had dreams and visions of the future. Really fascinating stuff, but I'm not going to dive into that today. But I do want to read about the fiery furnace, which is Daniel 3, 8 through 30. And I suspect it was a difference. So this is before the lion's den was the Okay, so this is Nebuchadnezzar. So it's a different king, right? This is the same king as the first story, but different from Darius. So King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, I think are pretty tall, 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. All right, I have to know how much is a cubit. Let me check. I used to have a study Bible that would say it in the bottom. Okay. My goodness. A cubit is 4.5, sorry. A cubit is 45.72 centimeters or 0.45 meters, so a foot and a half. So basically a foot and a half, right? So cubits to, let's do cubits to feet. Sorry guys, I have to know how big the gold statue was to understand. Cubits to feet. 70 feet equals 46 cubits, 46.66 cubits. So 1 foot is 0.66 cubits. So let's see, 60 cubits. I have to know, guys. I have to know how big it was. 60 cubits is 90 feet tall. 90 feet tall! Wow, that was massive. So that's like, I would say about 3 stories tall, like a 3-story building, right? Something like that. Maybe more, maybe 4. Okay, now we have an image in our heads, right? Of this gold image. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, 90 feet. And its width was 6 cubits. So like 9 feet wide. Something like that. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon, and King And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps and the administrators and the governors and the counselors, the treasurers and the judges and the magistrates and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image of which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, and the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried out, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery in symphony with all of the music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace." So obviously nobody will want to do that, right? So at that time, when all of the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the symphony with all of the music, all the people and nations and tongues and languages fell down and worshipped the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Daniel's friends disobey the king. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all of the music shall fall down and worship the gold image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace," right? There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not worship your gods or worship your gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, I think Daniel was like out of town when this happened, because he definitely wouldn't have bowed down, but we don't know what happened to him during this time, so he wasn't there. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. King Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship my gold image that I've set up? Now, if you are ready at the time when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery in symphony with all the music, and you fall down and worship the image which I've made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter, for that is the case. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Saved in fiery trial. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than what they usually heated, and he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh yeah, they tied them with ropes, so only the ropes burned, not their skin. Isn't that interesting? And cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the flames of the fire killed those men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose in haste and spoke, saying to the counselors, "Did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he said, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like a son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their heads were not singed, nor were their garments affected. The smell of the fire was not on them. They didn't even smell like fire. Oh my goodness. But the ropes were burned off of them. Isn't that interesting? They were not singed. Their clothes was not singed. Their hair was not singed. They didn't smell of fire at all. But the ropes that were tying them together were burned off. Only God can do that. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, and they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap." All right, time to go to church. Talk to you later. Bye. I'm coming.